What if you slipped out of reality and landed in an endless maze of yellow hallways and found there's something hunting you in the dark? Would you make it out? Oh, I don't think so. This is Jim, and today we're following Clark and Mary as they try to survive a place that was never built to let anyone leave. Along the way, I'm going to point out every mistake they make, what you could try instead, and exactly why none of it would save you either. This therapist is about to learn that in a place like this, finding the way out is not the same thing as escaping. We open on a DoD recording from June 19, 1990. A person walks through a stretch of yellow corridors that seem to go on forever. Following the cables on the floor, he reaches a room packed with electronics, computers, radios, switches one on, identifies himself as Darren, and tries to reach someone named Tenor. He says he's lost the rest of his team. Says he's never gone this deep into the corridors before. Says he saw something out there he can't describe, because he never got a good look at it, but he's certain it's real, and he wants out right away. Instead, he starts hearing movement around the room. Then, out of nowhere, a bird gets thrown through the doorway and scares him half to death. He checks on the bird, it flies off, and instead of staying put, he decides to follow the corridor it came from. That's the first mistake. Not a fatal one yet, but the first domino. The deeper he goes, the more debris he finds. Tape, scattered leaves, furniture that shouldn't be there. Then the noises start again, closer this time, and he realizes something is behind him. So he runs, hoping to lose it in the maze. Instead, he runs straight into a second creature, gets cornered in a decorated room, and that's it. Tape ends. We cut to people in lab coats, staring at the screen. From there, we meet Dr. Mary Klein, watching her childhood home get torn down by a demolition crew, the house she grew up in with her mother, gone in one afternoon. Then Clark walks into her office for a session. Mary tells him something simple but true. People repeat the same patterns over and over, looking for new answers, hoping that somehow this time it'll turn out differently. It won't, obviously. But repetition is the easiest thing to reach for, because it's what kept us safe as kids. She tells Clark he learned to push people away before they could hurt him first, and as an adult, he's still living by that rule. Alone feels safer than close. Clark pushes back. He's not lonely, he says. He has employees, clients. Mary corrects him. She said alone, not lonely. They're not the same thing. Clark admits he hurts people without meaning to, and maybe that's why he deserves to be alone. Mary asks if he actually believes anyone deserves that. He says he doesn't know, but maybe it's not a bad thing either. That's the tell. The idea of isolation isn't a passing thought for this guy. It's load-bearing. Mary explains that his past experiences, the times he didn't get support from anyone, convinced him it would always be that way. So to protect himself from going through it again, he chose to just be alone first. To shift that pattern, she suggests he forge a new path and see where it leads. Clark agrees immediately. They run a role play. Mary plays Barbara, Clark's ex-wife, recreating the night of their final fight. Clark came home drunk, broke a glass, woke her up, and they tore into each other. Barbara furious that he kept showing up wrecked. Clark furious because he gave up his real dream, architecture, to run a furniture store and bring in money while she stayed home for law school. Remembering it wrecks him on the spot, to the point he apologizes to his own therapist mid-exercise. Mary tells him that reaction is completely normal. The whole point of the exercise is to help him process it and find a new way through. Then we cut to Clark, filming a pirate captain ad for the furniture store. The chair he's sitting on breaks at the end of the take and dumps him on the floor. Genuinely terrible advertising for a furniture business. And in his embarrassment, he snaps at his staff, not realizing the store was already open the whole time. Meanwhile, an electrician shows up. The power meter reads normal, which doesn't explain the high bill, since Clark swears everything gets shut off when the store closes. Down in the breaker box, the technician is baffled. On top of the standard breakers, there are 3 red switches, wired in with zero logic. They flip them to see what they're connected to. Nothing upstairs goes dark. Cat just shouts down that the mouse is back. No power issue at all. And a technician's conclusion is that those extra breakers can't possibly be doing anything real because the wiring doesn't even run through that part of the circuit, and somebody simply installed switches that connect to nothing. Now keep that detail in your pocket because it matters in about 10 minutes. Okay, this isn't a normal maze, and it's definitely not a building you casually go explore. The Backrooms doesn't let people leave, it swallows them. The concept started in 2019 on 4chan, when an anonymous post dropped a photo of an empty yellow room that was, at minimum, deeply unsettling. Someone replied that if you clip out of reality in the wrong spot, you end up somewhere that smells like old damp carpet, buzzing with the eternal hum of fluorescent lights, roughly 600 million square kilometers of randomly segmented empty rooms, and something is always wandering around in there with you. Small detail. The original photo was actually a furniture store mid-renovation after water damage, somewhere in Ohio and Wisconsin. Fitting, given where this story ends up. Now for the non-place, and this is the first time I've seen a show actually nail the term. It's a real academic concept, coined by anthropologist Marc Auger in 1992. A non-place is pure transit. Airports, subway corridors, parking garages, a hotel lobby at 3 a.m., somewhere you pass through anonymous with no history and no attachment. It's the exact opposite of somewhere real, like your grandmother's house, packed with memory. Non-places carry their own specific loneliness. The backrooms is that loneliness taken to infinity, which is why the 1990 expedition was doomed before it started. You cannot map a non-place, because mapping assumes stable geography, and in a place where every room is identical, that assumption collapses instantly. We already saw how easy it is to get lost in there. That researcher separated from his team in minutes and got picked off. Trying to map the backrooms is like trying to map a desert made entirely of identical sand. Look away for 1 second and you no longer know which dune was your marker. And Darren threw away his only lifeline, the radio, because he heard a noise and went to go check it out. There's an actual search and rescue protocol for exactly this moment, when you realize you're lost. It's called stop. Stop moving. Sit down. Breathe. Think about how you got there. Observe your surroundings. Only then do you plan whether to stay put or move. Statistically, people who stay still get found faster than people who walk, because a moving person becomes a moving target. They wander out of the search zone, walk in circles, or pass within feet of a rescuer and never get seen. People walk because panic creates tunnel vision and a compulsion to just move. That's the exact impulse that made Darren chase a sound and then bolt. Only problem: staying still in the back rooms means something eventually comes for you anyway. And running blind means you either get more lost or slam straight into a dead end, at which point whatever's hunting you gets you regardless. Realistically, the best move Darren had was to hide somewhere nearby and mentally mark the radio room, checking back periodically to see if he was still being followed. But let's be honest, getting lost in the back rooms is basically a death sentence either way. Now, let's talk about Clark. That store's sitting on a bomb. Breakers exist to do one job. When a circuit overloads or short circuits, the breaker trips and cuts power before the wire heats up and starts a fire. The brand installed here happens to be a real one, and it was notorious for failing at exactly that job. In tests run by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, the failure rate was enormous. 39% of single-pole breakers and up to 85% of double-pole units didn't trip when they should have. Some never tripped at all. Some stayed energized, even switched to off. It's the electrical equivalent of a smoke detector that doesn't go off when there's a fire. And flipping breakers like that, just to see what happens, is a great way to start a fire. Nobody notices until it's too late. Clark is already a lost cause before he ever finds the anomaly. A non-place carries its own built-in solitude, the space of anonymity for people who are nobody there. Now layer that over who Clark actually is, because Mary already sketched the guy before the weirdness even started. An ex-architect who traded his dream for a furniture store, divorced, drinking heavily and fully convinced he deserves to be alone. I don't need to spell out how well that profile matches the backrooms. This is someone who's basically already given up on himself, with nowhere left to go back to. And a non-place is built exactly for people with no home to return to. What Mary's describing to him is a real concept too: neural loops. The brain is about 2% of your body weight, but burns 20% of your energy, so to save fuel, it automates anything you repeat. Around 40% of daily behavior runs on pure habit, decided automatically. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you repeat a behavior, that connection strengthens and the groove gets deeper. The brain defaults to the path already carved because it's cheaper. So yes, technically you can blame your brain for being lazy, though I wouldn't try that excuse out loud. That's why Clark pushes people away on reflex. It became a habit, and control shifted from the thinking part of his brain to the automatic part. The roleplay itself is a legitimate technique too. The theory is that people learn more from acting out a conflict than from just talking about it, because you relive the scene instead of describing it, while the therapist steps into the role of someone significant from the past. It serves three purposes: releasing trapped emotion, seeing the moment from a new angle, and rehearsing a different response, which is exactly the new path Mary is trying to forge, one that could break Clark's habit of pushing everyone away. Mary handed him both the diagnosis and the cure in a single session, and he simply ignores it. That evening, Mary watches a commercial for her own self-help book about forging a new path in life and stares a while at the slab of concrete carrying her and her mother's handprints. Meanwhile, Clark is lying in a cot at the store watching a tiny TV and popping sleeping pills. The TV cuts out and won't turn back on. Odd, since the lamps still work fine. Odder still, the store's downstairs lights suddenly switch on and start flickering. He looks back at a photo of his ex-wife, drives to her house, replaying his conversations with Mary the whole way. Days pass. Mary and Clark go about their normal routines. At a social gathering, Mary sees a mother with her daughter and appears to slip into a traumatic memory, bad enough that she has to step away to take medication. That night, Clark is watching TV when the broadcast suddenly switches to footage of an all-yellow location with a figure in the background. The television shuts off on its own. The basement light turns on by itself. Rattled, Clark goes down and flips every switch trying to kill the light. Nothing works until he hits the red switches. Almost everything goes dark, except one gap in the wall, barely visible, with light bleeding through it. He leans in to listen through the crack and falls straight through the concrete into the back rooms, those same endless yellow corridors. He steps back through the wall a few times, just to confirm he's not losing his mind. Once he's sure, he starts walking the place, taking it in. Furniture, signs, dead animals scattered on the floor, a cardboard totem playing looping messages. Following the speaker's cable, he reaches a locked door he can't open from his side, but spots a piece of paper sticking out under the wall. Behind a hidden door, he finds a tunnel with a bag dropped at the entrance. Inside it, ID for an Agent Warren and a handful of other items. Instead of stopping to think about what that actually means, he asks aloud if anyone's inside the tunnel. No answer. He crawls all the way to the end and finds a strange room with a decorative chair from the commercial and a pit full of junk. While he's poking through it, he hears movement from the tunnel behind him. Something on the other side is moving. He doesn't hesitate, sprints for the other exit, gets it open, and makes it back toward the stop sign he passed earlier, and, eventually, back through the portal to the store, chair in hand, completely stunned by what he just found. What he doesn't know, every second of it was being watched by a scientist on the other side. Days later, Clark shows up at Mary's office, visibly wired. She asks if he's using again. He says he hasn't had a drink since Friday. Then he asks her something odd. Has she ever had someone committed? She says yes, when a person is a danger to others, to themselves, or clearly incapacitated. Then Clark tells her about the space he found. He describes an entrance hidden behind something like a mirror, an interior so massive, it barely makes sense, so vast he can't even describe it properly. While he talks, he notices Mary looking at him differently. She tells him what he's describing sounds delusional and not dangerous, just a fantasy. She asks if there's anyone inside. Clark says he's heard footsteps in the corridors but hasn't found anyone yet, though the place could be the size of the New York subway system and hold hundreds of people. To make the scale land, he shows her a hand-drawn map from days of walking the place. She asks why nobody's ever found it. He says because nobody ever looked, it's underground, the entrance is hidden, it's on no city map anywhere. He clocks immediately that she doesn't believe a word of it, so he grabs the map, tells her he'll be back with proof, and storms out saying she'll owe him an apology. Straight from that appointment, Clark goes to Bob and Kat's place and offers them overtime. He needs help with an investigation. At sunrise, the two head to the store basement and find Clark packing rope and gear into a bag, which he calls investigation supplies, and explains they'll need to rope themselves together. Bob asks where they're even going. Clark tells them, through the door, the one he drew on the wall, which understandably terrifies Kat, who's now convinced her boss has lost it. Clark asks them to just trust him and steps through the wall in front of them. Once through, he calls back that it's safe. Bob, despite thinking this is total insanity, doesn't overthink it and steps through camera in hand. Confirms it's safe. Kat follows. Once inside, they flood Clark with questions. Where are they? Whose furniture is this? Clark admits he still hasn't found the owner of the items and says he's been exploring this place every night since he found it. Then he wanders off, leaving Kat a moment alone to ask Bob if they'd been drugged. Bob says he'd know if that had happened. Not exactly reassuring, especially since he'd just smoked, though apparently that doesn't count in his book. Look, I'll be honest. Anyone would probably walk through a portal like this. Imagine getting the chance to step into somewhere completely new. Of course you'd be curious. That's basic human wiring. And right before Clark crosses over, Mary's own self-help ad was literally about crossing a threshold, forging a new path. The window isn't locked. Are you ready to step through? Which is exactly what he does. Curiosity has a price tag, and for Clark, that price could be his life. His real problem isn't that he went in once. It's that he has nothing left outside to pull him back. Someone with a good life waiting on the other side goes in, looks around, and goes home, assuming they even can. Clark doesn't have that life. His wife left him. He hates his own work. He has a drinking problem, and from the moment he stepped in, this place was already showing every warning sign in the book. A welcome loop playing in every language, like an airport or hotel lobby greeting you in English, then Arabic, then whatever's next. Exactly the disconnection I mentioned earlier about non-places. Hearing a message in a language you know isn't meant for you. That bag Clark found isn't a discovery. It's basically a headstone. Finding someone's bag abandoned in a place like this is one of the clearest warning signs there is. When authorities search for a missing person, one of the biggest red flags is finding their essentials left behind. ID, wallet, keys. Nobody willingly abandons their own identity. You already know what it means to find someone's belongings without the someone. Investigators generally have to assume the worst and start looking for a body instead of a person. That bag at the mouth of the tunnel is exactly that signal. The odds Agent Warren is already dead, or gone, are enormous, and Clark keeps going back every single night, oblivious to the fact that any one of those trips could be his last. Worse, he uses the one person who could genuinely help him as an audience instead. He shows up talking about a 51.5 setter dash, infixtory, involuntary psychiatric hold, up to 72 hours, for someone who's a danger to themselves, to others, or gravely disabled. In other words, he's not asking for help. He's making sure he doesn't get committed for whatever he's about to say. And he's so locked in on mapping this place that staying away is the worst possible outcome for him. The Backrooms has him completely hooked, like solving this mystery is now the thing he needs to keep living. So when Mary doubts his story, he storms off furious, insisting he'll return with proof, and makes an extremely reckless call. He drags two people into a place he barely understands himself, and look at how he does it. He just offers overtime pay, explains nothing properly, and runs a recon expedition that only exists in his own head. He leaves Bob and Kat completely in the dark. To be fair, there's no clean way to explain what the Backrooms even are to someone who's never seen it, but bringing two people in blind is worse than not explaining at all. He should have grabbed a camera and gone alone. Clark has no way to guarantee that place is safe for anyone else. He doesn't understand it himself, doesn't control anything in there, and the fact that he's made it out intact every time is pure luck. The Backrooms has already swallowed someone before. That bag proves it. Bringing two more people into a bet he doesn't even understand just raises the stakes. And Bob, frankly, isn't in the best state to be doing this. Going into the Backrooms high is about the worst possible move. It's a maze, and if you need to react fast or retrace your steps, you're already behind. Weed isn't exactly known for sharpening reflexes. They cross the stop sign area and reach a kind of slide tunnel Clark found one night. Since Bob has the camera and wants in on the adventure, Clark ties one end of a rope to Bob's waist and the other to a bed frame so he doesn't just freefall. Kat is visibly panicking about her boyfriend's safety. Bob brushes it off, saying he could have gone down without the rope at all. Clark still tells him to go only as far as the rope allows. Bob delivers the classic, "Tell my mom I love her" line and slides down. He makes it into a new room full of old, rotting clothes. Nothing alarming at first. But as he nears the end of the rope's length, he sees something moving in a dark room ahead. He yells to be pulled up immediately. They start hauling him back, but before he can say anything else, something starts pulling the rope from the other side. Clark and Kat try to hold on, But whatever's on the other end is strong enough to drag not just Bob, but the entire bed the rope was tied to, and the two idiots standing at the mouth of the tunnel along with it. Down below, Kat sees Bob's body being dragged off by the creature and runs after him, leaving Clark no choice but to chase her too. He sprints deeper into the back rooms, passing rooms that get progressively more disturbing. A room full of blood-stained couches, something that looks like a children's play area, deeply unsettling given the context. He keeps chasing Kat and reaches a dark room with a Christmas tree in the center and human figures fused into the floor. Things get even stranger when he switches on a lamp, apparently alerting whatever lives in this room, which starts chasing him. He runs, ends up in an all-blue room with a bathtub and a pool, falls into one of them, and eventually stumbles through more darkness while hearing Kat scream for help, telling him he needs to let her in. The catch: she seems to be seeing him through glass, but from his side, it's just a plain wall. He sets the camera down in a corner to think, and while he's distracted, a creature emerges from the dark and takes the camera. The next morning, Mary is deep in a nightmare built from old memories. The stretch of her childhood when she couldn't leave the house because her mother seemed terrified of something waiting outside. Out of nowhere, a wrecking ball smashes through the front door in the dream, and she jolts awake. To settle herself with something good, she reaches for that piece of concrete, carrying her and her mother's handprints. Then, Clark calls. On the phone, he tells her he's opened the window to a new path, and that he isn't coming back. At the same moment, across town, the sync scientist who's been quietly watching the backrooms sees Clark's old furniture store commercial air and goes pale. Mary drives straight to the store to check on him. The second she walks in, she sees mail piled up untouched on the floor. The place has clearly been empty a while. Still, the door's unlocked, so she lets herself in, calls Clark's name a few times, gets nothing back, and heads down to the basement to look for him. Down there she finds his map of the backrooms and the doorway he sketched on the wall. She steps closer, watches a mosquito fly straight through the wall like there's nothing solid there at all, tests it with her hand, confirms it's real, and walks through after him. On the other side, she realizes Clark wasn't lying and starts moving through the yellow corridors looking for him, with absolutely no idea what she's actually walking into. After passing a few rooms full of furniture and debris, she finds writing and drawings scratched into the walls, lines about how thinking in terms of magic isn't realistic, that here and now runs both directions. That's when she catches a sleeve moving behind the wall. She calls out for Clark and he steps into view, telling her she's making too much noise. She asks where they are and how long he's been down here. He says they're in every place that's ever existed, and before he can say more, they both hear something heavy coming down the hall. Clark tells her to stay calm. The moment she turns her attention back to the corridor, he gets her in a chokehold and puts her under, telling her it's for her own good. While she's out, Mary slips into a memory of her mother being committed to a psychiatric facility and having to live alone afterward. Here's where I have to stop and break down exactly what went wrong, because this rescue attempt was survivable in theory. The failure was the anchor. Tying a rope to a bed frame is a decent idea, executed terribly. You cannot trust an object that isn't fully secured, and this is what happens when you don't. That bed practically launched everyone downward the second Bob got yanked. The second mistake was leaving slack rope in that tunnel at all. The creature only managed to grab Bob because he stopped to chat instead of untying immediately. In his position, I'd have shed the rope off my waist entirely or hauled the whole line up so nothing was left dangling below. Firefighters are drilled on this exact rule. The people who go in to save someone are usually the ones who die. The correct method is rescue from the outside. The victim comes up in a harness, connected to a rope with a winch and a tripod anchored properly outside the hole. And whoever's watching never stands in the line of pull, because a snapped rope or cable or something getting dragged, like that bed, takes the bystander with it. There was a way to plan this better, but let's be clear about something. This was their first real test inside the backrooms, and it finished Bob almost instantly. Even if they'd all escaped that encounter, the next one was always going to be lethal. Kat, for her part, just handed herself straight to the thing that took Bob, and honestly, you'd do the same. Imagine your partner. Imagine them getting dragged into an unknown place by a monster. Hard to walk away from that, even hypothetically. Now imagine it's real. You'd try to save them too. In a moment of panic, your first instinct is to protect the person you love, exactly like Kat did. Clark only went down because the bed dragged him. Otherwise, he probably just goes on with his life. Remember that firefighter rule I mentioned? Kat is the textbook example. She ran after the man she loved and got herself lost in the back rooms, ending up in a room with no door and, almost certainly, something already inside it with her. Now for Mary, and this is where we can start connecting some dots. It seems the backrooms pulls in a specific type, people who are isolated, alone, or carrying a hole in them, if we can put it that way. Mary and Clark share that profile. Mary appears to have gone through something genuinely heavy with her mother, leaving a real void in her. A lot of people go into psychology or psychiatry specifically to make sense of something they suffered, hoping to spare others the same experience. Not a universal rule, just a pattern that seems to fit Mary. Not every therapist would chase a missing patient the way she did, let alone take the risk she took, walking into a completely unknown location. That risk cost her badly. When a therapist gets too personally invested in a case, they start acting like the patient's rescuer friend, and they can go down with them. The moment Mary crossed through, she stopped being the therapist. A clear-headed therapist reports a missing patient or hands that footage to the authorities and let them run a welfare check, instead of walking into an abandoned store, down to the basement, and through a portal into another dimension. And that wall Mary finds tells you something crucial about the non-place. The backrooms has no stable geography. Clark spent real effort trying to map the terrain, and the writing on that wall admits the place redraws itself. Even the ceiling ends up wrong. It's like trying to memorize the layout of a dream. Every time you look, the stairs have moved. The hallway that was there is something else now. Mapping a dream gets you nothing. And the chokehold Clark uses on Mary is truly dangerous. It compresses both arteries in the neck and cuts blood flow to the brain, which drops almost anyone fast. In a study of 24 police officers, 16 went unconscious in under 10 seconds. Hold too long, lose your grip control, and you're looking at brain damage or death. And the irony here stings. Poor Mary came to rescue Clark, let her guard down around him, and discovered he's the predator now. The correct move in a situation like that is always distance, stay to the side, never turn your back on someone, never let anyone get behind you. And notice something. Clark seems to be living in there full time now, telling Mary calmly that she makes too much noise, which is exactly how he found her, and exactly what tracks with how Bob got taken. Bob was shouting from below right before something heard him and came. Nobody here got destroyed out of pure stupidity. Bob wanted an adventure. Kat chased the person she loved. Mary went to fulfill what she felt was her duty to a patient, and trusted that patient the moment she found him. With no idea the backrooms had already claimed Clark first, every impulse that got these people killed is an impulse you'd have too. Mary wakes up tied to a chair, listening to Clark repeat back the exact speech she gave him about cycles. He sets a plate in front of her and asks if he's a disaster or not. She stalls, tries to offer help instead, tells him not to do anything he'll regret. He insists on an answer, and terrified, she finally says yes. Clark says that kind of life is beautiful anyway. She looks around and asks who the other people in the room are. Clark explains they're creations of the backrooms, alternate versions of everyone who's ever come through, built from the memories of people who entered before. The more times that memory replays, the more deformed the copy becomes, which explains the two warped men nearby and the red-haired woman behind him, clearly a version of Barbara. Clark believes this entire alternate reality, every room, every piece of furniture, was built the same way, and that these replicas are improved versions of the originals since they feel nothing, no pain, no ego, no fear. He drives a blade into one to prove it, as if Mary weren't already terrified enough. Clark casually mentions you can eat the replicas and tears off a piece of one to demonstrate. Then he opens the fridge to grab a drink and reveals Kat's head inside, which sends Mary into full panic, begging to be untied. Clark tells her she'd just run off and end up back here anyway. She keeps pushing, promising to do anything if he'll free her hands. Clark says what he actually wants is to stage a scene and hear her say he never did anything wrong, except he doesn't want Mary saying it as herself. He wants her to play Barbara on the night he got kicked out. To sell it, he kills the lights, tears the scalp off one of the replicas, and puts it on Mary's head. Then he sits down and repeats the same lines from that fight, losing track of time at work, being sorry. Mary plays along, slipping into Barbara's voice, which sends Clark into a rage, yelling that yes, he drank and he needed it just to get through the day, since he's the one paying for everything, including her law degree. But mid-scene, Mary drops the role entirely and shuts the whole performance down. She tells him the truth straight. Barbara didn't leave because of the drinking or the late nights. She left because of Clark's victim complex, the way he frames every bad thing in his life as someone else's fault, when the reality is Clark is the one responsible for his own choices. Clark breaks down and asks how he stops being like this. Mary tells him honestly she has no idea. She can't save anyone. Understanding what that means, Clark admits the truth. He doesn't want to change, and he likes it here. For the first time in a long time, he feels like he belongs somewhere. Mary agrees to let him stay, but makes it clear she still wants to be freed and leave. Despite seeming completely gone, Clark stands calmly, unties one of her hands, and apologizes. But right at that moment, the mirror version of Barbara bolts from the kitchen, and they hear something heavy approaching. Mary panicking again. The towering shadow captain steps out of the dark. Clark asks it what it's doing there, and when the creature seems fixated on Mary, Clark explains she's their therapist. Tells the monster not to worry because she's already leaving. He adds that, according to her, they don't need to change, and the creature lifts him off the ground like it's going in for a hug. Instead, it starts devouring him brutally. Mary uses the distraction to free her other hand and bolts from the kitchen. Outside, she finds herself in a replica of a neighborhood. No exit anywhere. The captain is already coming for her, so she ducks into a random house to hide. Manages to get back into the yellow corridors and has to cut through several bizarre rooms to lose it, hurting her leg along the way. She squeezes through a dog door and reaches a space full of apartment units, with a massive shaft in the middle. Refusing to give up, she claws her way up a ladder to the next floor, just as the door behind her is destroyed. Upstairs, she realizes she's back in a replica of the furniture store and sprints for the exit, only to discover it's just another copy with no real way out. Cornered again, she grabs a coat rack to defend herself and cracks the captain's wooden leg. Then she stumbles into a cardboard totem, triggering a gas release straight to her face, and drops. The captain closes in while she's down, but she grabs its face, pulls the handprint concrete slab from her pocket, and bashes it hard enough to break free. She finds a narrow gap in the wall and dives through it, realizing the captain can't fit, and decides to push through the wall entirely. On the other side, she's gassed by men in protective suits and hauled into a secret facility. There, she sees bodies, gets placed in an interrogation room, and meets a scientist named Phil, who starts asking questions. How did she end up in the back rooms? What was she doing there? Mary answers honestly. She went looking for Clark at his furniture store and ended up here. She asks where she is, repeatedly, until Phil finally answers. The company he works for, Sync, used to build MRI machines before they stumbled onto the back rooms. She asks if he's ever gone in himself. He has. Mapping the place and documenting anything possible is literally his job, because this, to them, is the greatest discovery in human history, something almost too vast to describe. Mary realizes what he actually wants, for her to describe what she learned in there. She asks if doing that gets her released. Phil says someone else decides her fate and just asks her to share the experience, which almost feels like a joke to her, because explaining the back rooms to someone who's never been there is like trying to explain what a dog is to someone who's never seen one. Then we see it. Her memories have already been replicated by the back rooms. Bob and Kat's missing person posters are already down there too. And worst of all, Mary herself already has an alternate version waiting. Let's talk about human memory for a second, because it explains everything this place is doing. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction, and it warps a little every time you retrieve it. Psychologist Frederick Bartlett proved this back in 1932. He fed a 330-word indigenous folktale to 20 students and had them retell it hours, days, even years later. Every retelling shrank the story. Strange details got swapped for familiar ones. Canoes became boats, seal hunting became fishing, and some people simply erased the ghost from the story entirely. That is exactly what the Backrooms is doing. It's trying to remember everything, and everything comes out distorted. The stop sign comes out backward. The rooms are broken versions of reality. Nothing quite lines up, because the more this place remembers, the less accurate it gets. It's a game of telephone, played with our reality, except with no reason behind it. Clark didn't want to leave because he had nothing left outside. In the back rooms, he had a home again. No more sleeping at the store, no bills, no life falling apart around him, Because let's be honest, that store was already circling the drain. And in there, nobody questioned him. Nobody demanded anything. He never had to face that. The wreck of his life was his own doing. And that might be exactly what the Backrooms wants. Latch onto people who've run out of hope and let them rewrite reality inside its walls. The catch is that anyone who tries to leave ends up like Kat, and it seems the captain was Clark's own warped persona doing the same thing in reverse, finishing people off instead of pushing them away like he used to in the real world. The moment Clark decided to let Mary go, the Backrooms summoned the captain, and Clark paid the price for trying. Mary genuinely escaped the captain multiple times. Good survival instincts. The problem is, every exit she found was still just another wing of the Backrooms. The entire store had been copied. The whole place was just an endless stretch of corridors and warped rooms, and one wrong step could drop you straight into that massive shaft past the dog door. Mary did basically everything right. She fought the captain, took its leg off, and it still didn't stop coming. She wasn't saved by her own effort in the end. She was saved because Sync's researchers happened to show up. Without them, she'd still be looping through those corridors right now, waiting to be finished off by the captain or something worse. And even that isn't really a rescue. Everything that happens to her from here just turns her into research material for a company running a secret government-funded operation to study the Backrooms. The odds she gets sent back in to help map the place or ends up a lab subject outright are enormous. Phil made it clear he doesn't even know what her fate will be. I think we both know what that usually means, so here's the actual answer. If you went into the Backrooms, it wouldn't matter how careful you thought you were being. You'd end up lost in there permanently, unable to find a way out, eventually caught by something you never even got a clear look at. And whatever survived wouldn't be you. It'd be a warped copy carrying all your memories just as distorted as everyone else's, except you wouldn't be alive to notice. Because that's all this place seems built to do. Replicate a reality it never actually saw.